Welcome, listeners, to episode 6 of Future Secured. And today joining us is Ben Doyle. And Ben Doyle has been a Chief Information Security Officer or a CISO for, I believe, over 20 years. And that has really encompassed a huge amount of the growth of our digital lives. And, you know, if you go back to 2004, things were very, very different. I think we were almost pre-Facebook, pre-smartphones, all that kind of stuff. And now it is ubiquitous. And now it is and now it is ubiquitous in all of our lives. So thank you very much for joining us today, Ben. How are things?
Very good, thank you. Great to be here. So always interested in a good conversation.
All right, well, let's see if we can bring that
We'll
for
try
you.
and provide that. Yeah, that could be the biggest challenge of the whole thing, trying to get interesting conversation.
So what do we do?
Not a problem with you. And how are you doing, Jason? Thanks for joining us again.
Always well, that couldn't be better. It's been great and looking forward to Benny. We always have interesting conversations. It'd be good that we can actually record one for once.
Well, let's just dive straight in then, Ben. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and, you know, the journey you've been on as a CISO. Just, you know, sum it up in the beginning over these last 20 years.
Sure. So I've talked about this a fair amount at conferences and whatever. So yeah, it's actually 20 and a half years, coming up to 21 years, which is really scary. At Thales Australia. So those who don't know Thales, it's a big French aerospace and defense company. Do anything really to do with high-tech electronics, critical safety electronics, from doing military stuff to space stuff to high-end lasers to SIM cards to all sorts of weird stuff, makes it a really interesting company to actually be part of. In Australia, mainly, it's come out of Department of Defence, which was a joint venture called ADI, which Thales got permission to acquire fully in 2006 and became Thales Australia New Zealand. And that's pretty much where I kicked off in terms of my CISO role, because obviously it's a large defence industry player in Australia. And just from a political point of view, obviously it's not part of the Five Eyes because it's French owned. So there were some sensitivities and biases around that in terms of that, which allowed my role to be created, as well as the Chief Security Officer role to be created as a title back then. It's meant also that I've had a very unique journey and a very early journey when it comes to CISOs compared to a lot of other people. So apart from being named CISO so far back, I've done reporting to the board every quarter for 3 hours dedicated just on security for the last 18 years. So most CISOs are lucky to get 20 minutes a year. So whereas, you know, I'm pushing 6 to 9 hours a year of dedicated face time just on security. Which has been a fantastic learning experience for myself, from that soft skill learning of what boards are actually interested in, how we've actually also matured that conversation over time compared to what others are going into now, where effectively they're trying to train their board members and directors what cyber means, what risk means, what the right way to talk about it. I've had 18 years of training to do that with my board, which has been fantastic. In terms of, I guess, how it's changed, as you said, back in the days, what would have been Facebook. Geez, I remember the days when HT Moore first put out Metasploit and caused a ruckus on that. It would have been almost the days of MySpace, also going back really back then, which is funny. Yeah. And I actually noticed yesterday ICQ got notification they're going to shut down ICQ. And ICQ was a big thing back then. Wow. So they're shutting down in the next month. So it's like, geez, okay, I've outlasted ICQ, which is funny. But yeah, it was very nascent, and really the way I think about the changes is, yes, back then I had nation state stuff, and it was very interesting nation state stuff that was happening, and that was probably the most sensitive things that would happen to an organization. When you think about the criminal element, it was probably more a nuisance. There wasn't a very major impact. It might be an availability impact, and it's only been probably in the last 5 years where we've really seen criminal organizations work out how to monetize at an enterprise level, that we've actually realized what the actual impact is from a organization, generic commercial organization, of when you actually have breaches and how much that data is actually worth and how much it can impact an organization. And that's probably the biggest change I've seen, I guess, over the last 20 years, is that move from nation state really being the only ones you have to be concerned about to now you've got to be concerned about everyone.
Yeah, and that is challenging. And to that end too, now the attackers have AI to assist them with part of that trick too. So how have you seen that sort of play out in the last couple of years, you know, from your side of the fence?
I think at the moment when we talk about AI, it's
Gen
very
AI.
basic at the moment.
Yeah,
It,
machine
it,
learning.
it is it has made it easier, especially I guess for the lower tier more than anything else, is
Mm.
to craft their attacks a lot better across any language they want to do,
Yep.
and make it a lot harder to detect phishing emails and stuff like that. So it's very entry level at the moment. But like everything we've seen, it's going to be an arm race. So as
Mm.
well as we put the defense in and make, okay, what makes sense on the security operations and governance from an AI, how it's going to help us from a sort of cobot sort of co-pilot sort of view on security operations, exactly the same thing is going to be on the attacker side because there's a lot of money in it. And so
Mm.
it's worth them putting the effort in to try and get that edge to be able to break into systems. Yeah.
Yeah, and also just I've always liked your views on, say, the human element or how you've treated that within Thales, because it's actually a bit different or a bit nuanced to some of the other methodologies that are used. Have you changed that? I mean, the first time we spoke probably about that was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. In a similar podcast. But have your views changed on how you train internally with regard to your own team, and now with having Tesseract sort of join in, how has that sort of adjusted or changed things on your side?
I guess I learned early in terms of because yeah, if you think back pre 2010, and to be honest, I was doing everything pre 2010 when it comes to a
Mm.
cyber role, operations, everything, pen
Yeah.
testing, response. When you're doing big investigations and things like that, which may cover, and back then it would be inappropriate content because it's coming out
Mm.
of bad culture, being changed the culture. People just got email, so things get sent around. So you have an investigation which may touch 100 people,
Mm.
handing it across to a non-cyber person in HR with 100 people that may be involved and trying to then work out through a spreadsheet how they're supposed to counsel people.
Mm.
I basically learned that, hang on, there's got to be a better way to do this so they can actually work out the one or two, which are probably the critical people in the hub that really need to be counseled, and the rest just need to be given a warning and stuff like that, and a different discussion. So I sort of learned going through that process, the human side and I guess the psychology side of it and the value of it and how to actually do the job better. We've got to lean into that a little bit better, and sort of picked up on that on training, things like that. So, I mean, I think probably when we're talking about it 5 years back, it would have been where I started to try to look at, okay, how do we actually solve the culture of information security? Because
Yep.
I think it doesn't matter where you go, even if you ignore security, information management in any organization,
Mm.
where is all the IP held? It's held in everyone's inboxes because the file servers and stuff like that are an IT issue, and IT
Mm.
will look after and protect my files. But IT aren't engineers or finance or lawyers and stuff like that. So how do
Yep.
they know who should have permissions? But never been that, I guess, acceptance on both sides on how to solve that problem, where the real information ownership is. So I started about 5 years ago trying to take, and it was coming off the Telstra campaign of the five no's.
Mm.
Um, but I did it in terms of know the value of the information. And all I wanted
Yep.
was to change the behavior for people to stop and think before they do something with a bit of information. Because I think it's a case of people get so busy, they don't get a chance to think. But if they think,
Yep.
then they're not going to put a company at risk on purpose.
Mm.
So it was things like, okay, in terms of the information, it's like, what's the value to yourself if this gets leaked? What's the value to your team? What's the value to your organization? What's the value to a criminal element to be able to get hold of it? And what's the value to a competitor? And
Yep.
if you can stop and think about those five things before you send a bit of what probably is sensitive information, say, well, is there a better way to do that? Then that's a bonus. And I'm
Mm.
not telling them how to do anything, how to do it or anything like that. I just want them to stop and think. And
Yep.
that's it. So I did a whole campaign around that, and also trying to not use, in many cases, technology to
Mm.
actually force that either. So that's where it came up with the concept of nudges. So
Yep.
again, people know the behaviors they're supposed to have, but they're doing so much things. It's not the front of mind all the time. So if you can give slight nudges every so often, it brings it back to the front of the mind. So it's things like messages on screen locks. It's like cards on desks or cards on laptops if they're left unlocked, things like that. So, and they're not punishments; they're just small reminders where you drop it and walk away, and that's all it's meant to be. And it
Yep.
seemed to go down quite well.
Yeah, I think that was a good idea. That was one I really liked. Is that if someone had left their computer open, just a little card to say, "Hey, left your computer open," bang. It's live training, isn't it? Which often with the normal training, you're just going through the motions, and it's not live in situ where you're actually going, I get it. Yeah, I get it. That's, yeah, made that mistake. So I think that's really good.
I think what's really interesting, and speaking to you a little bit before around about, Ben, is the way that you've plugged in human behavior and built cultural, built culture out of that, and then culture and connected to that technical aspect of people's lives in the workplace, because that's something that I think is been a really big struggle out there, and often, coming back to the time you've insisted on having with the board, building those behaviors in. It kind of arms each of those people to be a little bit better. So could you just dive into that cultural aspect? When did the penny drop for you as you were kind of like on this journey, and what are some more of the really successful ways you've had of kind of building an experience or an environment like the cards on laptops and things like that, where people are able to kind of learn this and build it into their lives? Because so many times or so often we see being caught out for doing accidentally clicking on a phishing campaign and then getting a rude letter is not teaching someone how to behave better or solve a problem.
Yeah, I think it's probably more, it comes with experience, so, and a lot of interactions. And I guess being at the front end and having to do everything from the technical side to the governance side to the people side, and at all in one day, and content switching, I get to see the value. And it's basically how do I make my job easier in many cases by enabling other people. So some other things, I mean, I can understand why as technologists, we default to technology because that's what we're comfortable with. And let's be honest, as a generalization, technologists are introverts. They don't want to talk to people. It's something I've trained myself. I'm an introvert, but I've had 20 years to change that myself. Went through a lot of hard work to do that, where I enjoy it now, and talking to people. But we're going to always try default to a technical solution, and comes back to I think and there's a couple of things very key on what really isn't a good technical solution, and one I've posted about recently again is things like business email compromise, so wire fraud. That's not a technology solution. It's not the cheapest way to do the technology solution. That's actually a finance process issue. So you need to go in, you need to spend time with your finance team, your account payable, work out what their process is for approval and strengthen that. And that's just a case of, well, hang on, a CEO, a CFO is never ever going to be allowed to just send an email to shift $25 million. So it requires, at a certain value, say $1 million, they need to be standing in front of you. Is that an embuggerance? Yes. Does it slow things down? Yes. But what is the risk? But that also depends on very much your leadership also. So it requires, your leaders, i.e. your CFO, your CEO, your COO, to step up and realize that, when it gets to that level of risk, then I have a duty of care to make it inconvenient for myself to protect the company. Unfortunately, you're battling with generic organizational culture versus a process issue, where sometimes as a technologist, it's like, okay, I'm just going to find a technology issue because I can't deal with those bigger issues. And obviously, if it's a culture issue, it's going to be pushed down because no one wants to change the culture. But yeah, I mean, that is a zero cost implementation to fix a very big problem. But has nothing to do with technology. So what you might do from a technology point of view is monitor and alert. If you see something weird, you get support to verify emails and stuff like that if required. But on a day-to-day basis, it should just be a financing and account payable process that sorts itself out through good process, and good validation. The other one I'm very big on is phishing campaigns. I don't believe in them. I never have. Interesting, I saw Google just came out and said they don't believe with it either anymore.
They were going to follow your lead eventually, mate.
Eventually,
it's only a matter of time. They're always changing to you, and they're just waiting
had to
for the
keep
right
speaking,
time.
so it gathered into the Google search to bubble up with.
That's why we do this. That's why we do this, just to boost it up, boost up top of the line.
Now, there is value in phishing campaigns. I'm not saying they're not of value. The value is cultural change and behavior change. So if you are starting from fresh and you have a problem in your culture where people click on everything without thinking, there's value in trying to train people through phishing tests. What's good, what's bad, adds a lever. But I think it gets to a very quick point where the value disappears, where it just becomes a lazy metrics that people can report to the board, because it's also a metric the board understands because they've all had phishing emails. and no one
Yeah.
challenges them on, well, the time you spent with your employees doing this, and the time you're doing chasing up, the time you're crafting this trying to trick your employees, is it really meeting the outcome anymore? Because there
Mm.
is technology you can put in place to actually fix most of the phishing problems. I mean, from our point of view, we get maybe, if you're lucky, 2 or 3 people clicking on links that we can track, which end up being malicious a week.
Mm.
So that means that we can actually go pick up the phone and actually step through that email with them on a one-on-one basis. It's worth at 2 or 3. It's very easy to do from a soft point of view, and that's
Yeah.
actually more impactful because you're dealing with a live issue, which actually looks like real content. You can say, well, why did you click on it? And there's going to
Mm.
be a portion of time where everyone just basically has a brain fart. They're too
Just timing.
busy and they click on it, and it's
Mm.
like, yeah, and they'll say, yeah, and half the time they'll send an email later on saying, sorry, I think I've clicked on this. I just didn't think. I should have known better, which is the greatest thing to have when people turn around and do that. And it's like, okay, yeah, people make mistakes. It's an accident.
Mm.
So
And it,
understand, but there's technology you can put in to fix many of these things.
yeah, and I think that has improved definitely over the last couple of years. And to that end, the cyber strategy came out in November last year. What are your thoughts around it? How have you seen it implemented or not so far? The good, the bad, where you see improvements, and what else you can suggest on there? I'll just sit back and just put the microphone on mute for about 15 and a half minutes and just let you rip, mate.
You should have warned me so I could go back and have a look at it again. Because to be honest, it's been 6 months since I've looked at it because I've been
Yeah,
so
yeah.
busy. Um, when I first looked at it back in December, I mean, it is a big strategy.
Mm.
I did actually like that it tried to be practical in terms of it didn't just do a 6 or 7 year strategy and
Mm.
left it at that, but also went back to, okay, this is what we want to do in the next 2 years to
The
achieve
horizons, yeah,
the
yeah,
horizons, and then how we're going to track that and things
with the
like
plan.
that.
Yep.
So it felt real, and I think that comes off the back of again going into the um, industry engagement around a lot of the strategy going back a number of years, also from a SOCI point
Mm.
of view and things like that.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'd never seen a government agency engage so well and take feedback so well from
Mm.
industry and other partners and stuff like that to try to formulate what should be going forward. So that was actually good to see on the backside. Some of that was a very much a cultural shift, I think, from a federal agency in terms of how they put out policy and guidance and stuff like that. Is it making changes? I think it's too early to see at the moment, to be honest.
Mm.
It's too hard to tell is it right or wrong because it is going to be very nuanced in terms of how it gets implemented.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a positive step because it's to be honest, at least it's a strategy that can be followed.
Mm.
Everyone's going to have opinions based on their bias on whether they like it or not,
Yeah.
whether it's going to meet the outcome. But I tend to be half glass full,
Mm.
saying it has the positives that we can follow through. It's 7 years, things will get tuned. We're going to have changes. Either government will get re-elected or be a change of government, and they'll
Yep.
automatically do based on world politics and stuff like that. There'll be shifts also around
Mm.
that. But it touched on the right themes, I think.
Mm.
And the discussions that's drawn out of it again has the back end industry engagement
Yep.
that is actually making it actually more enjoyable than I've seen. I think dealing with government to actually say,
Mm.
well, this is not just government for government policy. There are actually real effects across industry, across academia, across small businesses, across consumers. So on
Mm.
how we actually do that. So,
Yeah, I think that was good, wasn't it? That it went down to that citizen level or the consumer level, which it really hadn't sort of done so much in the past, and sort of building from that base up. We need to start at the beginning. And you talked about culturally in the workplace. That shouldn't just be the workplace's, job. We shouldn't be unlearning stuff by the time we get to the workplace. This should be starting in the schooling system and starting a lot earlier, and have those habits in place. So, I agree. I think, and having a cyber minister definitely changes the game a bit too, that you've actually got a minister specifically for the task, has made a difference as well. But at the same time, I don't envy the task, and that's why I always say we need to work more collaboratively together and really work on that innovative piece and actually get more happening on that front.
it's also to understand that it is a massive job,
Yep.
and the job means you've got to coordinate across a lot of federal agencies also, not just the industry view or the academia view. And there's a lot that we don't understand as a context because we're not walking a mile in their shoes. So it's
Yeah.
never going to be perfect. It's never going to be what we want. And I think we just need to, as we engage, understand that we're taking it from a specific view, but there's
Mm.
many multifaceted view that has to be done in that role. It's not an easy role.
No, I think that's the thing is that a lot of people look at it from the point of view of this is what I need and this is what my business needs, rather than looking and what we're trying to do with Murph and like with what Tom and I are doing is sort of almost continuing on that old cyber sort of thing of looking at it as a whole and say how do you bring the whole community together and say actually you're good at this, can you do that and sort of stick to that and let's spread the load a bit, because there is a lot of people that sort of tend to all jump in the same thing rather than actually spreading it around and trying to find where the holes are and trying to fill them, whether that's with sovereign capability or in the shorter term, looking offshore to try and fill some and backfill some stuff until we can, sort of build it internally. But yeah, we've got a plan now. I think we just need to work collaboratively to actually say, okay, now how do we deliver this plan? And it's not the government's full responsibility. It's not certain companies' full responsibility, but it's a whole of nation responsibility. And we need to get the federal alignment aligned with states and aligned with everything, so that self-interest, they say always back self-interest, but I think on this front, we really need a whole of nation approach to this that actually aligns across the board.
Yep.
So I'd love to throw a what if question in there for both of you. And first to you, Ben, let's just say, we coordinated our Australian cybersecurity community, managed to convince the federal government to put another 250 mil in a bucket. Where would you assign that? Where do you think is maybe somewhere that could do with some more critical support and somewhere that you think with some investment could kind of lead some real opportunities for Australia's cybersecurity businesses?
I'd probably, and this is a side passion anyway, and a back passion is, I do miss Cyrise and what it actually provided to startups in Australia. There hasn't been anything to support startups in Australia.
Mm.
We don't have enough, I guess, levers to tip the scale to allow Australian companies to prefer to buy Aussie from a startup point of view because they feel it's safer to buy big vendors, global vendors, stuff like that. And they don't give the small Australian startups a chance. And to be honest, it can be hard sometimes, especially for a startup. So you take any government agency, let alone a large organisation, it takes 4 weeks to potentially put a vendor on your books, and a lot of legals and liabilities and stuff like that. That would kill a startup. So to do that, so
it
let
does
alone
kill them.
from an organisation point of view, is it worth me doing that for a $10,000 pilot? No.
Yeah.
To be honest, which is how do we solve that to make it a benefit to the organisation? Say, well, if you support an Aussie startup by investing in this sort of stuff, is there tax breaks? Is there something to make it easier to actually allow that Aussie ecosystem to actually grow? And we are never going to be America because we don't have the volume.
I'd like to turn the conversation back a bit to something you started to touch on earlier, Ben, and that is really what we're kind of seeing, what you're seeing out there is what the threat actors are doing in the last 12 months, especially around Gen AI. We were speaking to the global head of Qualys, and he was talking about how they're constantly just seeing organizations that are run by businesses. They've got HR departments, training departments, and they're basically just deploying AI to look for vulnerable attack surfaces and just to focus the teams that are in there doing the work. So what does it look like out there, when you're kind of peering into the bad actors on the internet?
I think they're probably going through a change also, like we expect it will go through a change from a operational point of view. Because yes, they're set up like organisations. They've been set up for organisations for 5 to 10 years now, in terms of how to actually structure it as a business, but it's also how to silo off potentially parts of the business. So you've got cells, so one cell can't see all of it. So it depends on which organisation, which way they go for whatever reasons. But like we'll see the benefits on, if you like, even from an IT point of view, let alone the security point of view, where AI is going to come in is getting rid of that stuff at that level one that we normally have a junior do. It should be able to be picked up from an AI point of view. We see it on the malicious side also, because why wouldn't they? If there's one less people they have to hire and pay that they can get an automation to do and can do 24/7, because who cares, they will. Then why wouldn't they implement it? Because it's a good business opportunity from a criminal point of view to do that. I think, as I said, it's just a bit of an arms race. The other one I've seen, and I spoke about recently, is the rise of phishing, which was an interesting term I didn't realise about. So QR phishing. But it does actually make quite sense, because now, we spent 2 years, 3 years during the pandemic training everyone to it's safe to actually scan a code, scan it wherever you want. And now, malicious actors have realised that people don't even check when they scan a code and assume everything's safe. And so now they'll send through their phishing emails as a QR code. and people pick up, scan the code, and go to a website, put their credentials in, and they've lost their credentials.
Mm.
So, but it's basic thinking when you think about it. It goes back to the human side we were talking about before. They're not scanning the code in their email app on their MacBook or their Windows. They're picking up the phone and scanning it, and then what they're missing is, well, hang on, when I scan something normally, if the company has an app, it will actually ask if I need to use the app or not. But I'm quite happy to
Mm.
just scan and go to a website and put in the same app, and haven't realized that I didn't get asked. So it's, again, how do we stop and get people to say, well, hang on, this is unusual. This is not how scanning this for this company normally works. I normally have to go jump into their app. So,
And also, I imagine that, let's say you had a secure issued phone, if you use the camera to scan a QR code, you probably bypass a lot of the secure software that's designed to pick that up, wouldn't you?
well, it's also, if you look at your gateways coming in, it's trying to scan for all this stuff. Unless they've actually done a specific OCR that can actually detect QR codes and then can actually translate what that URL is to run it through all the normal stuff, it'll go straight through.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
you do a QR code, which is a PDF, which is a TIFF image, as a scanned QR code. You've got to open up the PDF to realize there's a TIFF image. You needed an OCR of the TIFF image to work out as QR code. You have to decode the QR code to get the URL to then run it through all your behavioral stuff. So, given this is only just raised, it started to come in the last 12 months or so, how many of those products out there have actually updated themselves to be able to detect that? And how good and quality is that also now?
Yeah,
I imagine you
enough.
could probably get into the back end of a QR code manufacturer and cause a lot of havoc at mass as well, because people just queue them up.
But on the other side, it's just a human behavior. Potentially, it's instead of worrying about your product not being up to date, can you train your people to actually have that critical thinking?
Yeah, and I think that's the bigger challenge, because scanning the QR code has become very natural. So again, it's something that's easily exploitable until there's a lot of damage out there. And it is interesting teaching and trying to communicate to people. I think I'm incredibly impressed with the psychological side you managed to build in, that human behavior side, because that is the big challenge out there. Is people just don't start from a position of care. And I think it's a lot of the time because, it is this you're going to be caught out mentality, which doesn't teach people or provide people a kind of destination. I'd love to dive back into something you were talking about earlier, and that is around the time that you managed to dedicate with the board. So, that conversation with the board, with the C-suite, being able to kind of have that conversation and take that technical part of what you're doing in cybersecurity and kind of be able to arm these people is quite a challenge. And it's something that I would say very, very few people are doing well. So first of all, just, what do you think are some of the things, putting that time in deliberately and stuff like that have enabled you to kind of build the culture? And what are the advantages of your finding now, having put that time in over the last kind of, as you said, 15 or 20 years?
I think probably the biggest advantage we've had is it's always been a hybrid security committee, which means when I'm presenting, the chief security officer is presenting on physical, personal, and information, i.e. paper information issues, and the trade control, national trade control officers also doing it on export and international trade control, because they're all interlinked and they've always been discussed as interlinked. And yes, we'll have each of our topics we'll be talking about, but in many cases when we're solving some of the big hairy problems, and there has been obviously big hairy problems we've had to deal with, it tended to touch on all of us in some aspect. And so it's always been a joint conversation in terms of that, which is probably been the biggest benefit in terms of taking the technology discussion out, because it turned it very quickly into a risk discussion, because there's so many different angles, especially if you ever tried to interpret international trade control laws.
Thankfully, no.
I've lost a lot of sleep trying to read that.
Not this week.
A lot of sleep trying to read that, because that can be a lot of fun. So, and a lot of confusion on people's interpretation of that over time. So it's not an easy place to be. But even going into the bilaterals, even harder in terms of how, for example, Australia and UK deal with classified information between each other. But it's very different between Australia and France, Australia and US, because it's built by diplomats. But the interpretation down the industry can get fun. So you have to be a part-time lawyer. So
I think this is where Tom, I think Focus comes in. We have to add France to it so it can be Focus and make this guy's job easier. You know it makes sense. We've got to keep pushing for
Look,
it.
I do.
Don't worry about
I think,
Japan. Don't worry about Jawkis. It's got to be Focus.
I think former Prime Minister may have done a bit of damage that's still
Yes.
being going to take some time to fix on
Maybe.
that one.
But
Albo will fix it.
I think it's if I was going to give the advice, especially with new CISOs coming in, is you can't talk technology. They're not
Mm.
technology people. So it's more you've got to get back to things they understand, which is risk and impact to the business
Yeah.
without a technology sense. So what process is going to be stopping? What is the risk of this? What is the compliance risk? What is the finance fines and things like that? What are the restrictions that may end up doing on your organization for this? I mean, one thing I talked about also when I started to look at risk quantification with FAIR is I'd used it before. I'd used it back in 2010, and it was a great thing to actually talk about risks from a strategic point of view because it just gets rid of all the technology. The big change when I went back last year, when I found it, when the penny dropped, was when I looked at the history of how they build it now using PERT tables and Monte Carlo simulations. I actually realized when you get in front of the executives, what we're doing with a 5x5 matrix is we're turning up and saying, hey, I have a red risk or I have a critical risk, and it's going to cost me $500,000 to fix it. Please give me the money.
Mm.
If you're a non technology board member, how do you make an assessment on whether that is actually critical? What does critical mean?
Yeah.
And should I trust this person with $500,000? You're
Mm.
asking them to take a bet. And
Yeah.
that's effectively what we're doing. So, and that's what I liked about going back into FAIR is when the penny dropped, it's like, well, hang on. If you have directors and executives that have done project management or finance at any time in the last 50 years,
Mm.
they will understand PERT tables and Monte Carlo simulations, which means they may not still understand the risk or the cyber aspects of it, but they can actually trust how you built it using PERT
Mm.
tables, Monte Carlo, and have a discussion around that and understand that, which gives them something to grab hold of. At
Yeah.
the moment, we're not giving them anything to have, and we're saying, "Hey, gamble on me. I need
Mm.
$500,000 to fix this problem." So
Yeah,
there's a
it's
lot of
almost the reverse of that sales and marketing one, isn't it? Like, sales and marketing is we spend $1 to make $2, sort of thing, or they can give you a use case on that. You almost have to flip that around the other way, isn't it? Because it's the possible loss of something is the other way around when we talk cybersecurity,
correct.
right? So it is an insurance policy against something that could happen, which is different, because the board it makes sense. Sales and marketing, yeah, I spend $500,000 and we'll get $1 million worth of sales, and we'll increase our profit margin. This is the reverse, and it's harder to understand is that we use this $500,000 to protect possibly losing millions of dollars, down the track, and the reputational damage and everything else. So, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I appreciate you sharing that because that's often the hardest point I think for cyber people at board level to get the message across.
The other learning that people need to understand is, guess what? Not all cyber risk is bad compared to other risks.
Yep.
You can actually accept the risk.
Yep.
So, but doing a quantitative model puts it back into dollars and cents, which
Yep.
means you then can compare against financial risks and
Mm.
safety risk and operational risk, etc., like that. And there's only a bucket of money you can use in an organization.
Mm.
So that way, from a board point of view, they can actually look at, okay, what their risks are, what the probabilities are, and therefore which one should have the priority, which may not be cyber in the end.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
So, Ben, just I'd like to ask you a last question about looking forward in the role of a CISO. So, the next kind of 12 months, 1 to 2 years, what do you see? Is there any major changes afoot, or any ways that you hope that the Australian CISOs as a community might be shifting towards?
It's going to get harder. It's always been getting harder.
Mm.
And I've been thinking about this because we're sort of, especially in Australia. I mean, yeah, in the last couple of years, the market's been insane in Australia for cyber, let
Mm.
alone CISOs, and that's obviously because of the big breaches and the reaction. What I'm seeing now, I'm seeing good CISOs that decided to have a break 6 to 9 months back,
Mm.
extensive experience, which are having trouble even getting an interview right now.
Yeah,
And I think
same.
that's from a economics point of view. If you look at it, it's sort of we've gone through the fear part where everyone
Mm.
reacted to the big breaches, and so they wanted the best experts because they also thought the regulations were going to come down hard with big fines and stuff like that. And we've sort of got through that without any major trouble, apart from those that got
Mm.
compromised. And obviously, given the pressures with inflation and stuff like that, I suspect some are putting a pause on many things or taking a step down from a cyber point of view. Say, well,
Yeah.
maybe we don't need to spend as much
Mm.
and making the market a little bit harder. But the problem is the role of the CISO is getting more important, I think, over time.
Yeah.
And I was trying to compare this, and it's not nice to compare, but how does it compare against basically a CIO who's been around for a long time? Also, again, dealing with technology, I think the difference is when you think about the CISOs, we're going to naturally deal with the governance and um, the compliance aspects, the business aspects of how it can affect business operations, rather than from a CIO, which is more about enabling and the availability of doing business functions. And therefore, I think naturally the CISOs are going to keep getting drawn up to those higher level conversations as it matures, because the business risk impact across all aspects are going to get more and more important. We've seen the things in America with the FTC and SEC going after the CISOs, which has been an interesting conversation, talking to peers across there. That's obviously going to probably come down. And when actually, I'm talking to Annie Hager and EJ Wise at the last CyberCon. Probably won't hit the CISOs here. It's not how the Australian market works. It'll probably hit the directors there through ASIC, APRA, and stuff like that. But they'll want support. So which means we've got to step up to give them the right support, because it becomes very dangerous to them also from its same as occupational health and safety change the market. It'll change the board of directors. So there's a gap to step there, but there's a big business understanding to actually step there also, which means we're going to be stretched further and further into not the technology aspects, which is going to be hard because I think we're going to be still expected to be able to respond tactically and operationally. But we're also supposed to be at the table to be talking finance, to talk legal, to talk safety, to talk contracts. It's going to be in the middle of everything, which is going to be very hard. And we're going to have that split role, which is going to be very hard for people to do the context switch. So the expectation, I think, is still going to be there in terms of a lot of organizations on what they want the CISO to do, which is to fix all the problems, whether it's business, governance, or technical. But that's a massive role to do, and for a person to be able to front up and do that. So I don't think the role is going to get easier. It's going to get much harder still until we find what that right balance is going to look like.
Yeah, no, it's a massive challenge, and I take my hat off to you and anyone who does the role, because it's a thankless one, and it's one of the ones that, and you talk about Australia more specifically, it's one of the ones where you can make one mistake and actually lose your job, and it's hard enough getting a job at the moment. So I know Tom said that was the last question, but I'd actually like to throw in an extra one because I think it's worthwhile. You did go to RSA. Just from your point of view, like I've been there a few times, and this was Tom's actually first time, but from your time, you've been there a few times, like myself. What was it that you saw? I didn't see anything really that different. This year, what I saw is a lot more copycats, to be honest. I saw a lot of businesses basically being the same as a lot of other businesses, which I was surprised by. There doesn't seem to have been as much innovation as I'd probably like to have seen. Everyone was throwing AI on banners and stuff like that, but intrinsically and underlying it, it was the same sort of businesses. And really, when you sort of looked at it, there was a lot of businesses doing the same thing, maybe with different badges and stuff. Did you see anything though that could be useful in your role, or that we should be looking at here in Australia? And secondly, as part of that question, where do you think we could actually excel as a country if we chose an area of expertise or something we should focus on from an innovation point of view?
So first question, no. Generally, I mean, when I go to RSA and I walk the vendor floor, I spend a lot of time walking around the edges, looking at the startups and the people chasing VC money, the real, and you get a lot of copycats, but you'll get one or two really interesting gems, which are really interesting to do. Unfortunately, this year I was extremely busy. I didn't get the floor until Thursday afternoon, so I had 2 hours on it.
Yeah, they're packing up then.
So, but even then, there was nothing that really jumped out at me. I had some good conversations around topics I wanted to chase down, but nothing that was outstanding as fresh ideas. I think we'll see the evolution, and it was too early from a large language model. It's been 6 months ago. When ChatGPT finally launched, so it's too hard to pivot for many companies in terms of that. So I think it'd be more interesting to see what comes out next year, what vendors have stood up and lasted. What Australia should concentrate on, I actually think it's the mid-market. I think that's where our power is, because I talk about this quite a bit. When you actually look at the actual stats for Australia, it's 99.8% of businesses in Australia are less than 200 employees.
Correct.
That's mid-market. That's actually, if you look at America, it's micro-market. We should be absolutely skilled on providing cyber solutions to that market. It's the bulk of our market. we should be able to support that, and then we should be able to sell that worldwide.
Mm.
Also, then by doing that, we're actually helping, obviously, our small and mid-market and basically what is large organizations, our supply chain. So,
Yep, correct. Yeah, that third-party risk and everything here. I did see some solutions. I did see one on a third-party risk front, which was probably something a bit different to what I had seen before. But besides that, yeah, I hadn't seen a lot different. But no, I appreciate that, mate. It's I mean, we could keep going forever, but Tom will get us in trouble if we do that. This one might be it might be a part two later on down the track. But any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to say that Tom and I might not have asked you? Have you got any closing thoughts?
No, I guess, as you know, I've been reaching out quite a bit in the community just because I can. I'd encourage anyone who has the ability to reach out, rip the band-aid off. I know also, again, going back to being introverts, it's a hard step to do, but it's a worthwhile step to actually step in and do it. And we need more voices. So, I mean, yes, I've got a big voice, you've got a big voice. We need more voices in the community to work out what our cyber community culture is going to be. What are our behaviors? What are our acceptable values? Which is half the reason why I go out to do it, half of them I enjoy doing it. So I'd encourage anyone to speak up their opinions. So
agree.
Really,
Jump in. Yeah, everyone. It's the same. Like it's. I like the diversity of thought and actually having opposite opinions. I actually encourage that because I don't want to be in that echo chamber. We're all sort of the same. Yeah, if you create a board, if you do anything in life, have people that have opposing views to you and with respect will come against you. And Ben and I've had a lot of robust discussions where we have a difference of opinion, but it's with respect that I learn a lot, and hopefully it goes back the other way that you pick up a lot from actually having those conversations. No use talking to people that disagree with you all the time. You're now on Instagram, obviously on LinkedIn and stuff like that too, so people can get in contact with you and reach out if there's anything. Ben is a big supporter like myself of startups, so if anyone's got any ideas or innovative ideas that you want to share or run past us, both of us, and I hope I'm not speaking out of school here, but happy to help out where we can. That's what we're here for, is to encourage and pull up people alongside us to help sort of get in alignment with the strategy and with what we're all trying to do in cybersecurity, is that secure the nation, and secure our people. So if we can get some more Australian businesses, it was good to see Bug Crowd go gangbusters before RSA and see them having a stand there and be officially a unicorn now themselves, as a business. So the more of those we can get up and running, the better, I think, for Australia and for the rest of the world. So thanks for joining us, mate. I'll leave it to Tom to wrap up, but really appreciate your time as always, mate.
No, it's been fun.
Absolutely. Look, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Ben. And to the listeners, please jump on, press the subscribe button on YouTube. We've been getting quite a few comments. Jump into the comments, share it on your socials.
Some of them have been good, haven't they, Tom?
Oh yeah, they've actually been.
Yeah, okay, that's all right.
So when we kept you off replying on the chat, but thank you again for joining us. And we'll have a new episode next week. Cheerio.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, Ben.